has some tough choices to make, doesn't she? Yeah, for example, what would you do with the $2.8 billion that are about to be cut from education? You could, for example, you could spend $3 billion buying a new fleet of spy drones to boost your military spending. You could spend about $2 billion building a gulag archipelago to lock up refugees. Or you could give $2.4 billion to rich private schools, because God knows those rich kids are struggling to get by in schools with sometimes only one swimming pool. Now, here's the point, right? They're doing all those things. All of that spending's happening. They have the nerve to talk about now the federal budget deficit. Well, let's clarify this. There's no bloody deficit in this country. This country has so much money. There is so much loaded wealth in this country. It's not hard to find it. I've got good news for Wayne. I've got good news for Julia. You haven't lost your $17 billion. We know where it is. We know where you left it. It's always in the last place you look.
Gina's pockets!
It's in Gina's pockets. That's where the money is. They tell us to tighten our belt. I can't even afford a bloody belt. They tell us we've got to take one for the team. They're not on our team. I've seen class blowouts. I've seen class sizes rise. I've seen staff working all night. I recently met a guy in the RMIT cafeteria who said he also had some tough decisions to make. Now, we heard about Gillard's tough decisions. This guy said, I had to choose between paying my rent or buying my food. Now, we know those stories. We've heard students saying it. Here's the kicker. He wasn't a student. He was a tutor. He'd worked there for 5 years. That's the state of education here. We've got a fight in our hands. I'll see you at the next rally.
Woo! Thanks, Liam. And a big shout out to all the NTU staff who are going into their industrial bargaining periods as we speak, who are fighting thuggish administrations all over the state. I'm Sarah, I'm from the Monash Student Association, and I'll be co-chairing the rally today. Fucking excellent turnout, Melbourne! This is amazing! This is the biggest student rally in almost a decade in this state. And it's only the beginning. We've got Abbott to face next. We've got the university administrations to face, and right now we've got Gillard and her fucking lousy budget and $2.8 billion cuts to fight.
As a high school student, university's always been a dream of mine. But that dream has never felt more further away than it has today. Year after year, university gets cut. And we're all thinking about our university students, but the kids who are just as much going to be hurt by these are our high school students. So thanks a lot for coming out today, guys. I was always asked as a kid, what do I want to study at university? It was a very, generic question that I get asked. But now the question that I ask is, will I be able to afford university? That's not a question a 16-year-old should have to ask. That is disgusting. What do I want to study in university? Not can I afford it. My principals are telling me I shouldn't be involved in this because it's a university issue. This is forcing public sector to be fighting against each other. Don't let them win. Public sector need more money. Public sector don't need cuts.
Let me say first on the cuts that have been introduced. The Minister, Craig Emerson, says these cuts are merely a slowing in the rate of growth in the university system. This is not so, and it is deeply surprising that such a well-educated minister who has an economics degree seems to misunderstand some fundamental arithmetic. So let me briefly set out for you the scope and scale of what this government has done to our sector. Of course, we're all familiar with the cuts which were announced some 3 weeks ago, $2.3 billion worth. Let's break those down. $900 million worth of those cuts represent a real 3.25% cut in operating grants. There is no ifs or buts about that simple statistic. But students, of course, bear a very substantial part of the burden recently announced. Of the remaining $2.3 billion, $1.2 billion will be yielded by the abolition of the existing disadvantaged scholarship grants and their conversion into a loan scheme. Now, in the same way as the Minister struggles with arithmetic, or perhaps spins the numbers, the spin here is even more Orwellian. Who can possibly suggest, as the Minister does, that we are simply changing the way in which we deliver the grant system? Funny, I thought if you get given up to $3,000 a year as a grant, there's a pretty big difference between a grant and a requirement to pay that back as a loan. But if it was only these cuts, while we would be concerned, perhaps the volume of anger in the sector would not be as great when it's also contemplated that since the Gillard government came to office in 2010, these $2.3 billion worth of cuts are on top of $500 million worth of earlier cuts to research, and I say research cuts are dumb cuts, and $600 million worth of cuts to teaching and learning programs. In this coming election, the NTEU, of course, does not want a coalition government. If you've watched what's happened in the UK and read the coalition policy, you will know that in the UK, as I speak to you today, there is now no longer any effective public subsidy for the arts and humanities and social sciences. And the Coalition's promise to liberalise the fee regime and review the existing funding system merely foreshadows deeper and wider cuts. But that is not a reason to oppose these cuts. The NTU National Executive will be meeting in Melbourne for an emergency meeting on Friday, and we will be recommending that the union take up this matter in the largest single campaign we have ever run in a federal election. Let me also, before I conclude, make one other observation and acknowledge some friends. The final observation I would like to make is that all levels of education are threatened by the dominant neoliberal discourse. We have already seen here in Victoria the Bayou government cut TAFE back to the bone. But let us be clear, let us be absolutely clear that that is merely the latest instalment in a policy of commercialising and marketising the TAFE sector, which the Labor government at a federal level has also sponsored. So we also say TAFE cuts are dumb cuts. Let me, in conclusion, again thank you for turning out here today. And I'd like to thank the many unions and friends who've sent us messages of support. Can I just recognise in the crowd the state leader of the Greens, Greg Barber. The Greens proudly stood up to say TAFE cuts are dumb cuts. We have a challenge to keep this campaign on the public map, and I have no doubt whatsoever that the words uni cuts are dumb cuts will ring out between now and election day.
Just to show you the breadth of support we've got, I'll read to you briefly the message of support for the CFMEU Mining and Energy Division, which says, I write to extend the support of the CFMEU Mining and Energy Division for the NTEU and NUS campaign to force the federal government to reverse its decision to reduce university funding by some $2.3 billion. Our union acknowledges that this reduction has a very real potential to cause long-term damage to the sorely needed enhancement of skills and learning and research required in a modern society and economy. To this extent, these cuts are truly dumb cuts. If the government is so desperate to display fiscal responsibility, then instead of damaging our nation's tertiary education sector, it should instead repair the mineral resource rent tax to ensure the country receives a fair share of the profits made by the exploitation of our finite mineral resources. It should impose a super profit tax on the bloated and obscene profits of the major banks. And it should remove the nearly $2 billion per annum diesel fuel rebate handed to mining companies. The latter alone, of course, would about equal the cuts to the tertiary education sector. Good luck with your campaign, and we wish your unions well for a successful rally today. In solidarity, Andrew Vickers, General Secretary, CFMEU Mining and Energy.
Prime Minister Gillard, Treasurer Swan, Minister Emerson, it's not too late to rethink your commitment to the universities in Australia. Yay! Thank you. So, I'm asking this question of you, ministers. Do you want international students to be welcomed and taught well here? Do you want us to welcome as fair and just the many disadvantaged first-in-family students into the tertiary system and not be able to resource and teach them well? Do you want well-educated and trained students who bring a wealth of knowledge and thought to their future as Australian and international citizens? Don't you? So what you want is not just a clever country, but a really savvy, switched on, fair, educated, innovative, dynamically creative country. Yeah. Don't you?
The presence of the reasonably large presence of the Greens here is not something to apologise for. It's a reflection that it's one of the few parties in the Senate, in the Parliament, if the only party in the Parliament that is opposed the cuts to university funding. But the Coalition is fully supportive of these cuts, as we would expect, and they're likely to impose more on us if they win the next election. Bastards! But Janet can give us more of an idea of what the Greens' perspective is. Thanks, Janet.
Today is so important because these cuts are just so wrong. I was one of the lucky ones. I was born at the right time. I got to go to uni when it was free. It is so wrong that I got to have it for free. Your generation is saddled with huge debts. And I know. I've got two sons who are here in the crowd today who are going to be graduating, like most of you, with huge debts. It's wrong. How can it be that it was free for my generation when yours has to pay? What kind of short-sighted thinking does it take to do something so dumb? The Wall Street Journal reports that the most effective way to stimulate an economy is through education and research. Particularly, national wealth isn't what you dig up, it's what you know and how you use it. And in fact, the wealth which congeals around a few people and a few industries is not national wealth. It's wealth in a small number of private pockets. And it leads to the kind of economies which are financial crises in the making. It really makes you wonder where the old parties get their priorities. What's gone wrong with the values of the people who govern us? If they don't value higher education, what do they value? The problem is not the budget, it's not a lack of money. The money's there to be raised. They can end the fossil fuel subsidies, they can fix the mining tax, they can put a small levy on the obscene bank profits that are being made. This would raise over $50 billion over the next 4 years. The problem's political, so the solution has got to be political. Yeah. who value higher education. So where does that leave us? What would the Greens do? We would show that the Australians really care about students by properly funding higher education and student support, increasing staff numbers so they're not stretched to breaking, and getting youth allowance back up to somewhere that's near livable. $50 a week increase in youth allowance. And we believe that university education should be free for you like it was for me. We could afford it then, we can afford it now. And together we can make a difference. We can work to get the best kind of education for everyone, from preschool to postgrad, everyone, everywhere, no matter who they are, where they're from. I am absolutely passionate about this. I'm committed to seeing it through, but we need to be working together. The federal election is 4 months away, and as bad as Labor have been, the predictions for an Abbott avalanche. And if Abbott gets the Senate, there's going to be nothing to stop whatever he likes. So electing me to the Senate in Victoria, re-electing Sarah Hanson-Young and Scott Ludlam in South Australia and Western Australia will give us the power in the Senate to stand up against these dumb cuts and to stop what are likely to be even more brutal cuts under an Abbott government.
Remember, that was the first of many actions until we demonstrate to all governments of any persuasion that they can't stuff around with universities, their students and their staff. Let's fight them.